Children's voices sang in the basement, where there was nobody except for rusty handcuffs embedded in a concrete wall. Liam froze, his heavy combat boots rooted to the linoleum of the ground floor corridor. The sound was faint, filtering up through the floorboards like smoke, but it was undeniable. It was not the wind whistling through the shattered window panes on the third floor, nor was it the settling groans of the Brandon Provincial Mental Health Center, a structure that had been dying a slow death since 1891. It was a melody, a choir. It sounded like a hymn, distorted by distance and the sheer mass of the building, but the pitch was high, trembling, and unmistakably young. He checked his watch. 11:42 p.m., October 2nd, 2015. The silence that followed the initial burst of sound was heavy, pressing against his eardrums. Liam gripped his flashlight tighter, the knurled metal digging into his palm. He was a 26-year-old security guard hired to watch a rotting carcass of a building until the wrecking balls arrived in January. His instructions from the demolition company had been explicit, delivered by a supervisor who looked at the building with a mixture of boredom and disdain. Patrol the perimeter, check the ground floor doors, keep the vagrants out, and stay out of the basement. The wiring is shot, the air is bad, and it's a liability nightmare. Liam had adhered to those rules for 4 nights. He had sat in the small, drafty office near the entrance, reading paperbacks and ignoring the creeping sensation of being watched that seemed to radiate from the peeling wallpaper. But the singing changed the equation. Started again. Louder this time. All things bright and beautiful. The words were slurred, echoing as if traveling down a long metal pipe. It was coming from the central stairwell, behind the heavy fire door that led to the lower levels. Liam's breath hitched. Logic tried to assert itself in his mind. Teenagers. It had to be teenagers. The local kids were obsessed with the place. Urban explorers looking for a thrill, dragging spectral recording equipment or Ouija boards into the dark. If someone had broken in and gone down there, they were walking into a hazardous zone of asbestos and collapsing ceilings. Security, Liam announced, his voice cracking slightly before he cleared his throat and tried again, louder. Security, I can hear you. You need to come up. Now. His voice died in the hallway, absorbed by the damp plaster. The singing did not stop. It did not even waver. It continued with a mechanical, rhythmic persistence that made the hair on Liam's arms stand up. All creatures great and small. He walked toward the central stairwell. The door to the basement was steel, painted a sickly institutional green that was flaking away to reveal gray primer underneath. It was supposed to be locked. He had checked it at 8:00 p.m. He reached out, his hand hovering over the cold handle. If he opened this door, he was breaking protocol. If he went down there and twisted an ankle, he was fired. But the thought of children, actual children, lost in the labyrinth below was a liability of a different kind. He imagined a group of 12-year-olds, daring each other to go deeper, maybe one of them hurt, singing to keep their spirits up in the dark. He could not just sit in the office and let them stay down there. Liam grabbed the handle, turned with a gritty resistance. Unlocked. A cold draft hit him instantly, smelling of wet earth, copper, and stagnant water. It was the smell of a grave that had been left open too long. The singing swelled, filling the stairwell, no longer muffled by the steel barrier. It was coming from the bottom of the stairs, echoing off the concrete. I'm coming down, Liam shouted, unclipping the radio from his belt, though he knew the signal would not penetrate the thick foundation. Stay where you are. He took the first step. The beam of his flashlight cut into the abyss, illuminating dust motes that danced frantically in the turbulent air. He was making a choice to descend, driven by a duty that felt ancient and instinctual. He had to protect. He had to help. But as he descended past the landing, the air pressure seemed to shift. The heavy steel door above him swung shut with a deafening clang, guided by a pneumatic closer that should not have had that much strength left. The slam vibrated through the metal stairs, through the soles of his boots, and into his teeth. He turned back, shining the light up. The door was closed. He was sealed in, and from the darkness below, The singing stopped abruptly, cut off not by a pause for breath, but as if a needle had been ripped from a record. Liam stood on the metal grating of the stairs, halfway between the known world of the ground floor and the subterranean unknown. The sudden silence was more violent than the slam of the door. It was a predatory silence. "Is anyone there?" he called out. The acoustics of the stairwell distorted his own voice, mocking him. He waited for a giggle, a shush, the scuff of a sneaker on concrete. Nothing. Just the dripping of water somewhere deep in the dark, measuring out the seconds. He continued down, moving slower now. His flashlight beam swept the walls. They were raw concrete, stained with mineral deposits that looked like weeping sores. Graffiti from the 80s and 90s covered the lower sections, names, dates, crude drawings, but as he reached the bottom landing, the walls became bare. The explorers did not come this deep. The basement corridor stretched out before him, a tunnel of shadows. Pipes ran along the ceiling, wrapped in crumbling white insulation. On either side were doors, some hanging off their hinges, others firmly shut. The floor was littered with debris. Broken chairs, rusted gurneys, and piles of paper that had turned to mush from the humidity. Liam stepped onto the concrete floor. The cold seeped through his boots immediately. He needed to find the source of the singing and get them out. He needed to verify the exit. He swept his light to the left. A storage room, filled with rotting cardboard boxes. To the right, a boiler room, the massive furnace looking like a dormant iron beast. He walked forward, his footsteps echoing too loudly. Crunch. He looked down. He had stepped on a file folder. The paper was brittle, dry despite the dampness of the room. He squatted, shining the light on the faded type. Patient record, 1964. Subject, Michael T., age 9. Treatment protocol, hydrotherapy/isolation. Liam frowned. He nudged another paper with his finger. 1967. Subject, Sarah J., age 12. There were dozens of them, hundreds, maybe, scattered across the floor as if someone had dumped a filing cabinet and run. Why were these here? Privacy laws required these to be destroyed or archived in secure facilities. Leaving them to rot in a basement was a felony, or at least a gross negligence. But as he read the clinical, detached language on the visible pages, restraint applied for 48 hours, shock therapy administered, sedation increased. A sick feeling coiled in his stomach. These were not just records. They were a catalog of misery. He stood up, feeling lightheaded. The air down here was thin, poor in oxygen. He needed to finish this sweep and leave. "Hello?" He tried again. A sound. Not singing this time. A scrape, like metal dragging on stone, came from the end of the corridor. Liam swung his light toward the noise. At the very end of the hallway, past the debris and the rot, was a single heavy door. It was different from the others. It was not wood or thin sheet metal. It was a reinforced security door, thick and imposing, with a small, square viewing window at eye level. The scraping sound came again. Scrape, scrape. Liam moved toward it. Every instinct screamed at him to turn around, to go back to the stairs and beat on the door until the hinges gave way. But the thought of a child trapped in a secure room, trying to get out, pushed him forward. He reached the door. It was locked. A heavy deadbolt mechanism, rusted but solid. He put his face close to the small window, trying to see through the grime-encrusted glass. He could not see anything but absolute blackness inside. "I'm security," Liam said, his voice trembling. "Is someone in there?" Silence. Then, a soft, rhythmic thudding. Thump, 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 like someone rocking back and forth, hitting their head against the wall. Liam grabbed the bolt. He had to use both hands, straining against the friction of 40 years of neglect. The metal shrieked, a piercing sound that made his teeth ache. With a final grunt of effort, the bolt slid back. He shoved the door open. The beam of his flashlight cut into the room. It was a cell, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet. No windows, no furniture. The walls were padded once, but the padding had been ripped away, leaving only the glue stains and the raw concrete underneath. And there were the shackles. Bolted into the back wall about 3 feet off the ground were iron cuffs. They were small. Too small for an adult's wrists. They hung limp against the gray stone, flaking rust onto the floor. Below them, the concrete was stained dark, a stain that no amount of scrubbing would ever remove. The room was empty. There was no child, no teenagers, no source of the thumping sound. Liam stepped into the room, sweeping the light into the corners, desperate to find an explanation that did not involve his own sanity crumbling. The air in the cell was freezing, significantly colder than the hallway. Then his flashlight flickered. It was not a battery issue. He had put fresh batteries in at the start of the shift. The beam dimmed to a sickly yellow, then pulsed. Darkness swallowed the edges of his vision. Slam! The heavy door behind him did not just drift shut. It swung with violent force. Liam spun around, lunging for it, but the latch clicked before his hand could reach the metal. He grabbed the interior handle, a smooth, recessed cup designed to prevent self-harm, and pulled. Locked. The mechanism had re-engaged from the outside. Or from the inside. It did not make sense. He was trapped. In the isolation cell. In the dark. And then the singing started again. It was not coming from the hallway. It was coming from the corner of the room he was standing in. Liam backed away from the door, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He slapped the side of his flashlight, praying for the beam to stabilize. It strobed, creating a disorienting strobe light effect that turned the small room into a series of jagged snapshots. Flash. The empty shackles. Flash. The stained floor. Flash. The corner. There was something in the corner. Liam gasped, choking on the stale air. In the far corner of the cell, to the right of the shackles, sat a figure. It had not been there when he entered. He was sure of it. He had swept the room. It had been empty. "Who are you?" Liam whispered. The flashlight stabilized, casting a steady, weak beam on the figure. It was small, the size of a 10-year-old boy. It was sitting on the floor, legs splayed out unnaturally, back slumped against the wall. It was wearing a faded hospital issue gown that was gray with dust. Liam took a cautious step forward. The singing was coming from the figure. It was a low, humming now, a vibration that seemed to resonate in Liam's own bones. "Rockabye baby, on the treetop. Kid," Liam said, his voice trembling. "Hey, that's okay. I'm gonna get us out of here." He moved closer, crouching down. The figure did not react. It just kept humming. Liam reached out a hand, his fingers inches from the shoulder of the gown. He needed to see the face. He needed to know if the kid was hurt. "I'm going to touch you now, okay? Do not be scared." Liam's hand made contact. Hard, cold, plastic. Liam recoiled, snatching his hand back as if he had touched a hot stove. It was not skin. It was rigid synthetic material. He shined the light directly on the figure's head. It was not a child. It was a mannequin. An old medical training dummy, the kind used for CPR or nursing practice decades ago. The skin was a pale, yellowing rubber. Its eyes were painted wide open, staring blankly at the opposite wall. The mouth was a gaping O designed for intubation tubes. Liam let out a breath, a hysterical laugh bubbling up in his throat. A mannequin. Someone had staged this. Some prankster had dragged a dummy down here, set up a speaker, and was probably laughing at him right now on a hidden camera. "Okay," Liam said, standing up, trying to regain his composure. "Very funny. You got me." He turned back to the door, ready to kick it until the lock broke. He was not afraid of a doll. He was angry. He was going to find the speaker, smash it, and then break his way out. Behind him, the humming stopped. Then came the sound of plastic scraping against concrete. Scree. Liam froze. He did not want to turn around. Every survival instinct he possessed screamed at him to keep his eyes on the door. But the sound continued. It was the sound of stiff, jointless limbs dragging across the floor. He turned slowly. The mannequin was no longer sitting in the corner. It was upright. It was standing on its wobbly plastic feet, swaying slightly in the still air. It was 5 feet away from him now, and it was not facing the wall anymore. The head, with its molded hair and painted eyes, began to rotate. It did not move with the jerky motion of a machine. It moved smoothly, fluidly, like an owl. The neck twisted until the face was looking directly at Liam. The painted eyes seemed to have depth now. They were not just blue paint. There was something behind them, something ancient and wet. The mouth, that gaping circular hole, did not move, but the voice that came out of it was deafening. It was not a recording. It was not a speaker. The sound was being pushed out of that plastic shell by a force that had no right to exist. When the wind blows, the cradle will fall. The voice was a scream now. A chorus of screams overlapping, 100 children crying out in unison, projected through the throat of the plastic shell. The mannequin took a step. Its knee bent with a sickening crack of old plastic. Then another step. Liam backed up until his spine hit the metal door. He was trapped in a box with a vessel of pure nightmare. The flashlight beam caught the mannequin's hands. They were reaching out, and on the plastic wrists, Liam saw the indentations. Deep, scarred grooves in the rubber. The mannequin was not just a prop. It was a surrogate. It was the thing the children had clung to, or perhaps it was the thing that had replaced them. The singing shattered into a high-pitched shriek of static and agony. The mannequin lunged. Liam did not think. He did not plan. He reacted with the primal terror of a prey animal cornered in a burrow. As the plastic figure lunged, its rigid fingers grasping for his throat, Liam dropped to the floor. The mannequin, stiff and awkward in its momentum, crashed into the metal door above him, the sound like a gunshot. Liam scrambled on his hands and knees, kicking out wildly. His boot connected with the mannequin's shin. The plastic shattered. It was not empty inside. A dark, viscous fluid leaked from the break, smelling of formaldehyde and old blood. He rolled away, grabbing a rusted metal bar, a piece of a broken bed frame, from the debris in the corner. He scrambled to his feet. The mannequin was already turning, its body twisting at unnatural angles, the head rotating 180 degrees to face him while its body still faced the door. Liam swung the metal bar. He put every ounce of his fear, his adrenaline, and his horror into the blow. The bar connected with the mannequin's head. The plastic skull caved in with a wet crunch. The singing cut out instantly, replaced by a sound like air escaping a tire. Liam did not wait to see if it would get up again. He threw himself at the door. He did not try the handle. He used his shoulder, driving his weight into the latch mechanism. He slammed against it once, twice. On the third hit, the rusted internal spring of the lock shattered. The door flew open. He fell into the hallway, scrambling for traction on the slick concrete. He ran. He ran past the open doors, past the scattered files of Michael and Sarah, past the boiler room. The darkness seemed to be reaching for him, shadows stretching out to trip him, but he did not stop. He hit the stairs, taking them 2 at a time, his lungs burning. He burst through the ground floor door, not caring if it slammed or stayed open. He sprinted through the main lobby, out the front entrance, and into the cold night air. He did not stop running until he reached his car in the parking lot. He fumbled with his keys, dropping them, picking them up with shaking hands, and finally jamming the key into the ignition. He tore out of the lot, tires screeching, leaving the Brandon Provincial Mental Health Center behind in the rearview mirror. He never went back. He called his supervisor from a payphone 3 towns over and quit. He did not ask for his last paycheck. He did not explain. He just said he was done. 3 months later, in January 2016, the demolition began. Liam read about it in the newspaper, safe in his small apartment, though he slept with the lights on now. The article was small, tucked away on page 4. Grim discovery at former mental health center. During the demolition of the basement level, workers had knocked down a false wall in the isolation wing. Behind the concrete, they found a hidden cache of patient records. The files confirmed what rumors had whispered for years. Between 1960 and 1975, the facility had conducted unauthorized behavioral modification experiments on wards of the state. The article detailed the findings: electroshock therapy, sensory deprivation, prolonged restraint. Liam put the paper down. His hands were steady, but his heart was cold. He knew the truth. The article spoke of justice, of closing a dark chapter, of validation for the few surviving victims who had come forward. The authorities said the building was empty, that the ghosts were just memories and paper trails. But Liam knew better. He closed his eyes and saw the basement again. He saw the mannequin. The records explained the suffering. They explained the why. But they did not explain the plastic shell. A week later, a follow-up story appeared. A demolition worker had been injured. He claimed that while clearing the rubble of the basement, he had found a broken medical mannequin buried under the debris. He had tried to move it, to throw it into the dumpster. He told the paramedics that when he touched it, the head had turned. He told them it whispered to him. Liam cut the article out and burned it in his sink. He watched the paper turn to ash, the smoke rising up the vent. He knew then that some things do not die when the bill